What's up, everybody? Welcome in to the Live for Supercross podcast, last episode of the season. And it's been a great first season for the show. I want to thank everybody for tuning in who did, either to this or the podcast, who found out about it early on. With Rd.17 here, we're not going to take a lot of time discussing Chase Sexton's championship, simply because we talked about it so much last week, mostly because it's just a formality at this point. And that's not to say that he didn't put in a great ride here on Saturday night in Salt Lake City. Even if the field hadn't been as thin as it was, he probably still would have come out and beat him. He looked calm and in control, just like he has through the last few rounds of the season, but we knew he was going to do it, and he was a respectful dude, didn't want to celebrate too hard last week with Eli going down. And so it stoked me out to see him be able to come out and get the proper celebration, the proper fanfare that his achievement deserves. But because we don't got to waste time talking about this, we could talk about all of the race action that we actually got on Saturday night. And there was actually quite a bit of it, not always the case with the last round with all the injuries. But some good stories coming out of the 450 class with some hurt riders coming back. And with the 250 class, with the East-West combined, we got excellent race action, what we're probably going to spend most of our time talking about. But since we got the time, and since it was their last year of the season 2, we have some time to talk about the futures. And the futures main event we got on Saturday was absolutely entertaining. I hope you got to see it. It ended up being Casey Cochran, who's been on the podium or hovering just around it all season, who comes out and gets this one. He benefited from some chaos, a little takedown between Julian Bomer and Daxton Bennett. Bomer won the last 2 of these, so he's coming in hot. Bennett gets around him, and after the rhythm section, he knows Bomer's got the inside line. So he just goes way too high to try to protect himself around this 180 bull berm. And it was slippery here in the turns all day, even before it started raining. No traction up there above the rut. Bennett goes down. Bomer's right behind him, lining him up, sees it happening, tries to evade the disaster, can't do it, washes the front end. Bennett comes down on top of him, and Cochran just rides it home. But certainly an entertaining race that involved some of the main culprits that have been putting up wins all season. And I just got to say, when it comes to the futures, I think I feel like most people when I say it's an absolutely great addition to the schedule. It's not as if these guys are actually rookies in any sense. They could beat a lot of the privateers out there. A lot of these guys like Bennett and Bomer and Cochran could qualify probably for a 250 main event right now. You saw Talon Hawkins going up to try his hand at it, who's been in the futures just recently. And I think the only thing you got to say about it is it proves, with all the talent we saw in the 250 premier class, that the 250 class is nearly as much of a premier class as the 450s at this point. Not really an initiation class. And I think that just goes in my support of the fact that we ought to either combine them to get full races through all 17 rounds, or at least let them race a few more rounds and a few more showdown style rounds throughout the course of the season. Anyways, cool to see it, and look forward to seeing it in the future. Now we can go ahead and jump right into the 250s. And when we get to the 250 West Heat, which is basically like a main event, it looks a lot like the main event and the Heat did last week in Denver. It's Kitchen that gets the jump from the middle, with RJ Hampshire tucked in right behind him. The difference here between the main last week and this Heat here is that Levi Kitchen would not be tracked down by Hampshire this time, and he wouldn't be tracked down by Jet Lawrence either, who got a really good start, not the whole shot, but he was tucked in 4th. And for the first few minutes of the race, it was the top 4 of Kitchen, followed by Hampshire, followed by Mumford, followed by Lawrence, that looked like they were just working a conga line there, and they were taking off and leaving the rest of the field behind him. But none of these guys, even when Jet gets around Mumford, never able to track Kitchen down. This dude has just been consistent as of late. He's always consistent, but now he's got the speed And you don't get the feeling watching this guy that you get when some of these small bike riders are leading. When Hampshire's in front, you got to worry that maybe he's going to have something catastrophic happen. If Levi's off camera leading a heat race, he's going to end up taking this thing away. He is consistent at whatever pace he rides. And as that pace gets faster, it's just making him a person that you got to consider for the top spot pretty much every night at this point, even though he does not have a victory to his name and did not get one through his inaugural season here. Still a great season-long performance. As for the guy that Jet Lawrence passed to take third, Carson Mumford looked solid here, coming back late in the end of the season. Hasn't had the results in mains that I think he'd want, given his skill and ability, but has looked absolutely great in some heat races as of late. Just couldn't hold Jet Lawrence off until the finish. Jet Lawrence had the speed over him, not a lot of places to pass, but Mumford holding his own for the majority of the track. The real place that Lawrence was cutting off huge amounts of time on Mumford and everybody cutting into the gap was the whoops. If you take a look at a clip of this guy hitting the whoops next to Mumford or anyone else, he is just farther back on the bike. He is fully extended, not a small dude, and he's all the way off the back of it, arms practically locked out. And despite that, he looks really comfortable. Even other top riders, when they're stretched out that far, they got their backs hunched a little bit, and it looks like they're just trying to hang on, because to some degree you always are. Lawrence, even in these extreme positions, looks cool and collected. And even though in this clip he ends up on this pass on Mumford nearly going down, in the process, he manages to save it somewhat miraculously, and you can't really blame him for nearly losing it there, because the rain had just started to come down. The track conditions were evolving quickly. His renegade style probably would have worked 4 laps ago, but I think even so, the fact that he is letting the bike take so much of the load with those extreme body positions was what allowed him to save this. The bike didn't buck him because he was exactly where he needed to be on top of it to react to that. And just another thing in his arsenal, even if you got a track like this with no passing, if you're the best guy in the whoops, no matter how big they are, how gnarly they are, you're always going to have an opportunity to get by the guy in front of you. And here the 18 showed just that. Moving on to the 250 East Heats, this guy comes out, the number 238, leads the entire thing, and maybe he was stoked because he had just been awarded the Rookie of the Year award. I don't know if anybody was surprised by that, if there was anybody else you could consider it going to. In 9 starts, 3 podiums, and of course the big thing, second in points only to Hunter Lawrence. And the reason we talked about him last week and the reason we're going to talk about him this week has nothing to do with his main event results because he didn't end up getting on the podium either here or in Nashville. But the reason that we talked about him 2 weeks ago is because he's engaged in the most interesting points battle that we had going for us. Him and Max Anthony, the number 63, were battling for that second spot in points. Of course, Max Anthony rides for the Firepower Honda team for Martin Davalos. That's not a factory situation, so you know that the second in points would be absolutely huge to the man from Britain. And it was the closest championship battle we still had, with all of these other things getting tied up early as they were by the Lawrence brothers and in the 450 class in such an unusual fashion. And it's Hayden Deegan that ends up coming away with this thing. And despite the fact that he had 2 points on the Brit coming into this, Anthony had every opportunity in this main event to take this thing away for Martin Davalos and the Firepower Honda team. He gets a mediocre start around 7th, 8th, and ends up riding the entire race in that position. He was great in the mud in East East Rutherford, so you thought he might be great with the rain coming down here, but it wasn't a full mudder. There were conditions, areas that were slick. You could even see them on the broadcast, just like ice, and other areas where you really did have to apply the gas in the turns, in those deep ruts where there still was a bit of traction, and he just wasn't able to find the speed to advance through the pack. Meanwhile, Hayden Deegan comes around the first turn in dead last, got a horrible jump, realized it, wanted to avoid disaster, just coasted into this thing and started figuring it out with the rhythm sections. And even buried in the middle of the pack, he still had to deal with Hunter Lawrence, the number 96, 1 East champion, goes down, gets tangled up, not his fault, with another rider who goes down in a bull berm in the first lap. He has to roll the whole section, turn the bike around, and get going again. And Hayden Deegan gets right by him. They battle a little bit, and then Deegan builds some separation. Hunter Lawrence realizes he's got to regroup, but Deegan knows he's there the whole time. And in the end of the race, it is Hunter Lawrence who will emerge the champion between those two. He makes the pass again, totally clean on Hayden Deegan. And Deegan just had nothing for him at that point. Much like Anthony, he found the max pace he could run at comfortably, and it was good for the position he was already at. But the great irony of it is that by getting beat by Hunter Lawrence, he ends up taking the championship, because Hunter Lawrence at this point is the only thing separating Max Anthony from Hayden Deegan, and that's and allowing a 2-point separation. Once Hunter Deegan makes the pass on Max Anthony, it eliminates the gap and it allows Hayden Deegan to win by default, even though he loses the race to the Brit. And Max Anthony tried hard to get around Jordan Smith. He was trapped behind him, and that's part of what allowed Hunter Lawrence to catch him late in this race. And Max Anthony knew he had to make a move because it was coming, forced it on Jordan Smith when he wasn't close enough to do it, got caught up in the rut, couldn't set up properly for the double coming out of that turn, and Hunter Lawrence just gets away from him, and there was nothing Max Anthony could do with the amount of time left. And so by being slower in some sense, Hayden Deegan ends up winning this championship. Not something that happens all that often. In fact, it's probably something that happens almost never. But just one more feather to put in the fascinating cap that is Hayden Deegan's inaugural season. For the rest of the 250 class, the podium ended up being Levi Kitchen, RJ Hampshire, and Jet Lawrence. All of them had significant gaps between them throughout this race, so there wasn't a lot of passing, not a lot of race action between them. But we got to give kudos to RJ Hampshire's start. He really just took off with this thing, and start's not always his strong point. Really nailed him down towards the last half of the season. Excited to see if he could carry that into the outdoor season. Here in round 17, despite the good start, just not enough to hold off Jet Lawrence. Jet Lawrence gets on the Husqvarna rider's tail real early and just bides his time, sees RJ Hampshire get caught up behind a lapper in the whoops. And just like we were talking about, Jet Lawrence's forte, he absolutely crushes these things, cuts hard to the inside, and gives RJ a real rough ride. Nothing dirty, but closer to it than the 18 usually gets, because more than he usually needs to get. And you could say he did that because of the conditions. But he had 12 minutes left to make a pass. And you know that was payback for East Rutherford. RJ was a little reckless there. We know he hydroplaned. And you know that Jet wanted a chance to get him back. If that's all the retribution he's seeking, that's not all that bad. And RJ was cool about it on the podium, didn't have anything bad to say about the move. And all three of the podium guys, 250 West riders, have done better coming up against the East guys this year. Definitely still didn't get a chance to see Hunter and Jet battle each other all out. Seems like we never do. Either way, it was just cool. Everybody stayed healthy, and everybody who is healthy is going to be here after that race going into the outdoor season, barring some disaster in practice. We know how slim the 450s is going to be, so we need some category packed with talent to keep the championship points race interesting and to have a lot of teams involved. And with the two sides in Supercross merging together for the outdoor, I expect to get just that. Getting into the 450 class with the 450 heat one there, it's basically just the Ken Roczen show. I think Dean Wilson was one of the only guys in here with a real chance to give it to the number 94. And so Roczen and pretty much no one takes off the gate, and the number 94 just dispatches of the competition immediately. Would have, even if these conditions didn't suit him as well as they do, and they do. His throttle control allows him to be great in these slightly slippery situations that actually fool a lot of guys that also aren't shabby on the throttle. And you'd expect this is what it would look like when he goes into World Supercross after this season concludes, or now that the season has concludes. Of course, it comes out a couple weeks ago that he's planning to race World Supercross, and for that reason won't be racing outdoors here. So a bummer for us in America that we don't get to see this man line up and race through all 11 rounds of the Lucas Oil Motocross Championship. But of course, there's a question, and I haven't heard any updates on it, but there's a question about whether Kenny would have been healthy enough to race the outdoor season regardless after pulling off in the first lap of the main event. Gets his foot caught going around a 180 bull berm deep in a rut. That kind of shit just happens, and it hyperextends his knee. He rides an entire lap highly impaired. The situation was he wanted third points in the championship. Before Coop got hurt, there was a pretty big gap there. With him going down, an opportunity for Kenny to get that Suzuki into third. In fact, it would have been inevitable if he'd been able to get to the checkered more or less. Unfortunately, not able to do that, though he tried, and we can only hope that he isn't more injured than it appeared that it might be by him not being able to salvage that third in points. Not only is the guy a warrior, but you've got to imagine there's some sort of financial incentive, some sort of bonus for third in place. Even so, fourth not too shabby, and overall I think we got to give it up for the season that this guy had, giving all the commotion that preceded it for him. I think he built solidly and consistently and did just as much as anybody could have expected to him. But at the same time, the fact that two guys that weren't even there and weren't there for the last two rounds end up picking up second and third in the championship, I really think shows you, even in a deep field, how dominant the number 23, the number 2, and the number 3 were above the rest of the field throughout the course of this season, even though they traded off with each other for who was on the top every weekend. One more guy we got to see race again this year came out in the 450 heat race number 2. That's Aaron Plessinger, making his first official appearance back since missing a couple of rounds due to a gnarly injury that he had, I believe, in the morning in Nashville. And the man, the people's champ, he got on the podium and he said he didn't want the people of Salt Lake out there, the good people, out there cheering for nobody. So even though he's still sore, even though the Cowboys bruised, he got on the bike and showed up here. And he ends up getting second in the main event here, which actually ends up being his best finish of the entire season. And you know that he knew it. You knew he was feeling it. He was popping wheelies coming up to the finish line. Other than this, his best race of the finish, his only podium, Tampa. We know of the absolute tragedy he had in Detroit, nearly coming away with his first premier victory ever there. Despite that, you can't keep a good guy down, and he seemed to just be living in the moment, enjoying the second, despite the fact that he knows that he does deserve to stand on the top spot of the podium. And hey, not only did he show up for us, but he gave us a little excitement, maybe more than what the price of admission might have entitled you to. And you'd think after Detroit, there was one guy that didn't want to Superman again, that didn't want to let the bike get away from him again, it would have been Aaron Plessinger. But in the heat race, we saw it, one of the best moments of the night, Chase Sexton riding him hard. Aaron Plessinger blitzes through the whoops, that end collecting everybody, same spot it nearly got Jet. He loses the front end, gets away from him. He gets whiskey throttle trying to contain it. And he must have ended up getting off the throttle at the last second, because if he had gone in with the throttle pen the way it was at the end of that whoops section, I think he'd still be airborne. I think he would have flown into the stands and been facing all sorts of litigation from the people that he landed on. Not the case here, just tumbles over the camera. And we got a great shot from that too on the broadcast. And glad to see that he was all right and able to recover from that and do, like we said, come out here and get his best event win of the season in a main event. And there's one more guy, not even a factory guy, that we got to talk to when it comes to the 450 class. One more dude we got to be stoked for, even maybe more stoked than we are for AP, and that is Justin Hill, the number 46. For most of the season, he comes back after being a sheriff for a while, and he's running barely top 10, lucky to break the top 10. We know he can do better than that, right? We know what the guy's capable of. Comes out, gets a 5th in Nashville, then a 4th in Denver, decides he's going to keep improving, finally gets on the podium here, 3rd place, by far his best of the season. Had to make a great aggressive pass on Adam Sansarillo to do it. Clean but aggressive, had to knock AC out of the rut here because they were dealing with lap traffic. And even though the move slowed both of them down, Hill able to react to it better, able to recover through the rhythm section. AC not able to and never able to get back on Justin Hill's tail again. And Justin Hill looked great here, one of the best riders out there, period. He had multiple lines he was taking through the whoops at different points through the night, jumping through them, quad, triple blitz, and extraordinarily effective, making up a lot of time on people and just doing it every lap. In the rhythm section, there was one rhythm section where you could triple out of the corner onto the tabletop, save a lot of time versus doubling. And as conditions evolved, fewer and fewer guys able to do that, everybody resorting to the double. He did too eventually, but spent a long time, was one of the last holdouts still able to hit that even in the slick conditions, and did that in one more area. There was a triple section, the stadium triple, the second triple in that section. And the first triple, 2 small jumps on the takeoff and landing with that giant hump in the middle. And most guys struggling with it even in the morning. When it gets to the night show, guys either wheel tapping off the middle jump, double, single, just plowing into it, kind of like a wall, single, double. And again, Justin Hill, the only guy that was really able to hit this thing as a triple throughout the entire night, heat and main included, and never really came up that short on it. This guy can jump pretty much anything. And it was just sick to see, just like Max Anthony, despite his 3rd in the 250s, to see another non-factory guy having a monster season. And I think coming into next year, if he does decide to do it, he's going to start where he left off here. And even with the whole field healthy, this is a guy that we're going to expect to move his way through the pack on occasion. Now that we talked about everything that went down in Salt Lake, let's just take a moment here to talk about what outdoors is going to look like. Little preview for the 2 weeks ahead. In the 450s, we talked about it last week, probably going to be the Honda show. I think that's what everybody's calling. Will it be Chase? Will it be Jet? And if you think you can say whether that one goes either way definitively, I want to hear your arguments on that. I understand how fast Jet is. I'm still undecided. I loved his Donations performance, but I don't think we can invest everything based solely upon that. In the 250s, however, I think we've got a wide range of contenders. It's going to be a lot more uncertain. I mean, here in the East, Hunter's SX success seemed inevitable. Almost won last year against Christian Craig. Knew he was going to get it done this time. Had a bunch of wins coming into the season. In outdoors, not at all the case. This guy has only won outdoors one time in the Lucas Oil Motocross Series, and it didn't come last year. Didn't get a win at all last year. It came in 21, and by the end of the season, it was the sleeper Joe Shimoda who had steadily improved to be the best guy out there that wasn't Jet Lawrence most of the time at the end of the season, and we could see that the number 30 is still finding his speed out there in the indoor series. We'll see where his fitness level and his readiness is in 2 weeks when we go to Fox Raceway. But I'm sure Hunter's going to win some races. I don't think we're going to see the dominance that we saw here in the indoor season. I don't think he's going to be on the top spot of the podium every weekend. Besides Shimoda, I think RJ Hampshire's really getting it together, signed 2 more years in the small bikes. I think he believes and the team believes that he can get it done with Jet Lawrence gone. And I think if he could stay on the bike, he's going to pick up a couple of these, and when it comes to the Star Factory Yamaha team, I think both Deegan and Kitchen, if they keep improving like they have, and all signs suggest that they will, are going to come out and are going to be pushing for podiums as well. We got a couple unhealthy guys in Faulkner and McAdoo. Who knows when they're going to come back, but if they make it back for this season, maybe they'll be able to challenge. Who knows? But we've got a deep field here. It's going to be the deeper category, at least at the beginning of the season. And I think it's going to be unpredictable every week. And I am absolutely excited to see it. When it happens, we'll get together and talk about it then. In the meantime, once again, thanks for tuning into the program. Thanks for getting in on our inaugural season. I feel pretty grateful that the first season I chose to do this on turned out to be one of the most hectic, chaotic, and entertaining on record. Never a shortage of things to talk about. If you're listening on the podcast, go ahead and check us out on YouTube at Live for Supercross, no spaces. And until we get together again, I want you to remember, if you live for Supercross, then you need some love from the Live for Supercross podcast.